I would say that has been one of the biggest game changers for me in this whole learning process. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. If you're new here, my name is Georgina and I'll be making videos all about candle making and selling. And in today's video I wanted to talk to you all about hot throw in your candles and how to get the best hot throw that you can. Before we get started, I'd just like to ask you, if you've not already, please subscribe to my channel. Maybe you're a small business owner already, or maybe you are looking into making and selling candles, or you just find this kind of content interesting. Hit that subscribe button down below and click the little bell if you would like to be notified when I post a new video. So what do we mean when we talk about the hot throw of a candle, and how does that compare to the cold throw? So the cold throw is obviously what we smell initially before the candle is lit. So if you're going into a shop and looking at candles, then that is what you would be smelling in the shop, would be the cold throw. Meanwhile, the hot throw is what we are smelling when the candle is lit and burning. And I've heard a lot of people say that the cold throw is important for first impressions, but the hot throw is what brings customers back time and time again, and that is definitely something that I would agree with. Whilst this video is going to be focusing on obviously the hot throw, the cold throw is still important because it's what will draw the customer in the first place. And personally, if I'm looking at buying a candle in a shop and I take the lid off or take it out of the box and go to smell it and it's very, very weak, then that does not give a good first impression, and I would probably just put that back on the shelf. So they're both important. Now there are so many factors that come into play when we're talking about the scent throw of a candle and the hot throw. The first of which we're going to be talking about is fragrance oil and scent load. Now it's really important that before you have even made your first candle, you go on to the supplier's website where you've bought the fragrance oil and you check what the recommendations are for the use of that fragrance oil, whether it's 8% or 10% or 12%, and they will give you a recommended maximum load for that fragrance oil. Secondly, I would look at the wax that you're using, because that will also have a maximum recommended use for fragrance oil. So some waxes will only take a maximum of 8%, whereas others might take a maximum of 12%. So it's important that you bear both of those factors in mind before you even get started, because obviously if you start off using 10% fragrance oil in a wax which only holds 8%, then you are going to run into problems from the get-go. And those problems may not even be just the fact that you don't get a very good scent through, or you have oil leaking out the top of your candle jar, or you have a lot of sooting when the candle's burning, but it actually could be very dangerous. At the end of the day, that oil has been tested and the supplier has given you that recommendation for a reason. And I think it goes without saying, but obviously the last thing that you want is for your candles to become a health hazard or a fire hazard. So please, please, please just bear those factors in mind before you get started. Now obviously, as I said, the amount of fragrance oil that you can use will differ depending on what kind of wax you're using, but for the purposes of this video we use a soy-based wax, so just bear that in mind. I'd say there's definitely a fine line and a fine balance between using enough fragrance oil so that obviously it gives you a nice hot throw and fills the room or the house with that scent through, but also you don't want to use too much, and using that maximum that the fragrance oil supplier gives you is not always where you should be starting from. And it doesn't mean that if you use 10% compared to 7 or 8% that you're actually going to get a better scent through for the duration of the whole candle's burn time. And I'm sure it would be easy if you're just getting started to just go in there and be heavy-handed with it and just think, I'm just going to fill this up with 10% fragrance oil and hope for the best. And the reason for that is because if you use too much fragrance oil, you will probably end up with a really powerful burn for the first hour or 2 hours maybe, but you can actually end up burning a lot of that fragrance oil off in the first burn or the first couple of hours even, and then have kind of like quite an average to weak hot throw for the rest of the candle. And obviously that's not what you want. You want it to burn just as nicely throughout the whole candle and have a good hot throw the whole time that it is burning. The second contributing factor is temperatures. Temperatures are so important when it comes to candle making, and I think people think that because candles are calming and relaxing that means that candle making is like that, and it's definitely not. is actually more of a science than anything else. And that was definitely a big learning curve for me because I am absolutely terrible at maths and anything sciencey. So that was a bit of a challenge for me in the beginning, and it definitely took a bit of time for me to get used to. And I like to think of it though as like baking. You have to follow your recipe to the nth degree. And if you just go ahead and think, oh, I'm going to add this, I'm going to add that, and I'm going to put it in at 10 degrees lower than the recipe says to, then you're not going to end up with very good results. Now again, you will want to look at your supplier's website for your fragrance oil and your wax. So most suppliers that you can buy wax from will give you the melting point of that specific wax, but you're also going to want to find out the ideal temperature for heating the wax to, as well as the temperature that they recommend you adding your fragrance oil at. And some will even give you the temperature they suggest you pour the wax at, which is also very important for other reasons which we will probably address in another video. And as a guideline, I would say you could try adding your fragrance oil 10 to 15 degrees above the melting point of your wax. Now in my last video, I think I mentioned candle making kits, which are a great starting point if you're just thinking about getting into candle making and you want to dip your toes in the water. And many of them do come with thermometers inside. However, if you are really serious about getting into candle making and selling, I would recommend investing in a good thermometer because temperatures are so important. So if you're just using the one that comes in the kit that's very basic, then you might be struggling with your candles, and it might be because you're not getting very accurate readings from that thermometer. So I actually use a meat thermometer. It's a digital one which has a probe, which I then just leave in my wax when it's warming up, and then I'll have another one which I have in the jug that I'm adding the fragrance oil to, so that I'm not contaminating the wax if I'm making a bunch of different fragrances. And I will leave that thermometer in the description box below if you'd like to go and have a look at it. I would say that has been one of the biggest game changers for me in this whole learning process since day one, has been using a good, accurate thermometer. I would say that it has resolved any issues that I did have in terms of the wax obviously being a bit too hot or a bit too cold, which would then maybe result in sinkholes or wet spots on my jars. And I think so many of those issues were just down to the temperatures, and a lot of those problems were happening just because the thermometer that I was using was not giving me very accurate readings. And even though I probably thought that I was heating my wax up to the right temperature and adding my fragrance oil at the right temperature and pouring at the right temperature, that probably was not the case, because after I got my digital thermometer, I would kind of like use them side by side and see what kind of results I was getting from the basic thermometer, and they were quite different, let me tell you. So the third factor in getting a good hot throw from your candles is wicks. So if you don't have the right wick in your candle, aside from not having a very good hot throw, other issues which you might be encountering are having uneven burning, tunnelling, or even smoke and excess soot, which nobody likes. So again, when it comes to wicks, I would say it is a fine line and a fine balance when it comes to getting the right size. i.e. you don't want a wick which is too small for the diameter of your candle jar, which means that it's not going to reach a full melt pool ever and it's going to tunnel. And that obviously means that you're not going to get any kind of hot throw from your candle because it's just not getting hot enough. Likewise though, you don't want a wick which is too big for your candle jar, which means that you're going to get a full melt pool very, very quickly, because that also means you're probably going to get your wick mushrooming. It's going to create a lot of excess smoke and soot potentially. So if your candle only has a small melt pool when it's burning, and you really need to increase the thickness of your wick, i.e. wick up. But you also want to be careful to not use a wick which is too thick, because the hot throw comes from the fragrance evaporating through the wax, not burning. So what you need is a wick that's going to give you a steady burning flame that melts the wax, but not so much that you start to see sooting. And ultimately, if your wick is too thick, the fragrance will be drawn up the flame and it will be destroyed before it can evaporate. Another important thing to look at when addressing the hot throw of a candle is its cure time. Basically, the cure time of a candle is time in which both the wax and the fragrance oil are binding together, and different types of wax will usually have different curing times depending on what material they're made of. But again, for the purpose of this video, we are talking about soy-based waxes, which will generally take around 2 weeks to cure, which is important to bear in mind, especially because there are other waxes out there like paraffin-based waxes or soy paraffin blends, which take much less time. In fact, I've heard about I think it was a paraffin wax or a soy paraffin wax blend which only takes 2 days to cure. So with all the information out there, if you have not realised yet that most soy waxes will take 2 weeks to cure and you've gone to light your candle after only 3 or 4 days, then just remember that it might be that it's not had enough time to cure. So I would definitely go on and check with the supplier of your wax that you have left it to cure long enough. And again, I would look to join Facebook groups, and specifically the Facebook group for the website or supplier that you have bought your wax from, because that will generally be filled with people who are using the same wax as you and may have already found what the best temperatures are for them and the best cure time. Often there is obviously differing opinions, so I would say the best thing that you can do is just try it for yourself and find out that way. And I'll go back to the point I made in one of my previous videos that everyone's noses are different and everyone picks up scents differently. So whilst another candle maker might say, oh no, my candles are perfect after 3 or 4 days, if you were to test that same candle, you might not have the same findings, as it were. So just bear that in mind. And if you have made it this far in the video, then first of all, thank you. And second of all, I have some other little tips which will probably be a great help for you in getting a good hot throw from your candles. So the first tip is to make sure that your wax and your fragrance oil are properly incorporated when you're making your candles or wax melts. So I would recommend that after you've poured in your fragrance oil to your hot wax, to stir gently but thoroughly for at least 2 minutes, and that is going to make sure that they are properly blended together before you pour. And I say gently because if you are using a whisk or a big spoon, because if you are basically whisking your wax and your fragrance oil together, it might seem like you are doing a very good job at bringing those two things together, but you might actually be making more problems for yourself because you could actually create air bubbles in your wax, which obviously is not going to look good when the candles have set. Tip number 2 in the candle making process for getting a good hot throw is to make sure that when you are measuring out your fragrance oil that you are using weight measurements instead of volume. So you want to use a set of digital scales, and that's because not all fragrance oils are created equally, and you'll have some which are much denser or heavier than other fragrance oils. And that could lead obviously to problems if you have a lighter fragrance oil and mean that you're basically not using the percentage that you think you're using if you're just using like a Pyrex jug or something which is measuring in mils instead of grams, let's say. So you always want to be measuring everything when you're making your candles in terms of grams. I know that might seem strange because you're thinking, okay, well the wax is in liquid form, the fragrance oil is in liquid form, but trust me, if you're running into any problems, I would definitely try using grams on a digital set of scales, and it might be that that was your problem all along. So in conclusion, I would say there are many different factors that come into play when we're talking about getting a good hot throw from your candle. Ultimately, if you're not happy with the hot throw you're getting, you're probably going to look at one of those factors that I just spoke about, because at the end of the day it could be down to something as simple as not having the right thermometer, or not having the right temperature that you're pouring at, or not adding your fragrance oil at the right temperature. There's so many different things that come into play, but hopefully you found this video helpful and informative, and if you did enjoy it, then I would really appreciate you giving it a big thumbs up and subscribing if you haven't already. And don't forget to go over and follow us on Instagram as well at Ivy and Twine Candles, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys!